So what does 12-time Olympic coach Charles Poliquin know about getting big and strong without injuring ourselves that we don't? Well, the heart of it all centers on rest and basic programs. So off the bat, if we're doing low rep, high intensity work, he recommended a rest period of 4 to 10 days. Now he does get more complex than this. So for example, he's saying that bodybuilders really need to vary their rest periods. So he said that, again, if you're a bodybuilder, try and knock like one rep off one of your sets, still have a good rest, maybe knock 2 to 5% off, have a good rest, maybe then a 60-second rest, and eventually drop about 10% of the weight off. Now he said that essentially the reason for all of this is that it just increases hypertrophy, specifically myofibrillar hypertrophy, which is essentially like the density or number of myofibrils, which is just the muscle fiber, the things that actually tense to make you stronger. But the last thing, like 10% drop, he argued increased energy stores, which I guess is just another way of saying sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, which is sort of like the juice in the muscle, the thing that makes it look really big, as opposed to being like a really dense strength. He did say though, if we're looking at a movement where it's only moving at one joint, or it's a small muscle, or the muscle is mainly having a slow twitch density, then it's going to need less rest. One thing that surprised me is his recommendations around low weight. So he said that if you're doing low weight, you do high reps, which makes a lot of sense. If you're doing heavy weight, you can't really do high reps. But he said that if you're doing this low weight, high rep, you're doing low rest. I kind of thought that it would balance out, right? So comparing it to that high weight, low rep, they would ultimately need the same amount of rest, but it seems like he's saying it's just not as taxing on the body. You don't need as much rest. Okay, so that's sort of the overall rest periods between days and to some extent how long we should wait between a set. But even though this isn't necessarily a rest protocol, it kind of ties into it. It's around how he describes something called wave loading. So this is slowly building up to your max weight and then dropping it for 1 to 2 sets and then building back up. And I think that makes sense because ultimately we'd be less fatigued because we'd be dropping the weight. And we know that strength gain is going to be better if we are in general less fatigued. Moving away from the rest side of things and more onto the other side of programming around how many reps and sets we should be doing. He was very clear here that the reason that traditional strength training approaches don't often result in a high level of hypertrophy, so bigger muscles, is essentially that we're not doing enough volume. And that if we want to get around that, we essentially have to do like 5 to 15 sets of that low rep work, which is crazy, especially when you're considering the rest times that he's suggesting, and that other authors are suggesting. This isn't just exclusive to Poliquin, right? Like this seems to all coalesce towards the same idea of big rest for that high weight or dynamic work. So you're looking at a ridiculously long training period if you're doing it like that. But I guess the only thing that can sort of counter that and make that a bit easier, something not he talked about that others have talked about, like Pavel Sassoline, a great strength coach, is that whatever muscle you were working on, like say you did like a bench press, just work on something else during that rest time. It doesn't have to be you doing nothing. You're just not fatiguing the same local area. So for those of you that aren't aware, I've been learning all of this as a part of my 50 Days to Rebuild challenge, where I read 50 pages of a physio/exercise book and do 50 minutes of exercise in a day in an attempt to rehab myself. This is day 32, so we're making pretty good progress. That's essentially all I have for the learning side of things today, and I guess I'll just move on to the exercise portion of things from here. So I've been doing a few of these different joint movements that were promoted by Pavel Sassoline. One of them's almost like a hula hoop action. It's a bit strange, but it's meant to get the hips sort of feeling better and in general these joint movements are meant to get these joints feeling better by lubricating the joints, getting motion back into them. I actually didn't mind doing this hula hooping, it felt okay, but I will say later in the day I have started feeling worse. So I'm not too sure about that action, if it's a bit aggressive for me. It's also a bit of spine movement potentially, which is a bit worrisome to me. On the other side of things, there's this lateral reach, where you sort of try and reach as far as you can, imagining your arms almost like telescopic. Good and bad. At times it feels good, but at times it cracks, and when it cracks, it doesn't feel good. So again, I'm a little unsure on how to handle that. And really, unfortunately, I've been trying to do these dislocates with a band, and they felt really good, but then they started feeling a bit janky. Um, Admittedly, there's some parts that felt janky initially as well, but in general, it's felt good. But today, I got to that janky point and just sort of tried to like pulse before it and sort of back to that janky point, and that felt good. Like we were sort of working out the dodgy bit of range rather than really quickly trying to just almost skip past it, which I think is actually what aggravates things. On the McGill Big 3 core stability side of things, obviously always doing the bird dog. This is starting to feel a little bit better on the activation side of things and not so much compensation. Specifically, not seeing some crazy hyperextension, so I'm pretty happy about that. And I know the cat camel is not something that I really talk about much. It's really basic. It's kind of like a joint movement, actually, where you're taking the spine through a very small range of motion just to try and get a little bit of motion in it to sort of get some nutrient and healing in that area. I did find that retracting the shoulders actually felt better here. That's interesting. This isn't something that I've had a lot of, I guess, progress with. Like, it's a pretty simple movement. But it's never felt, I guess, perfect, but this is starting to move in a better direction. And lastly, I'll just note that I've been doing this exercise for my foot, where I'm trying to essentially balance and sort of abduct my foot out, my opposite leg, sorry. And I'm noticing that it feels a little stronger, I feel a little bit more balanced, so that's really cool. I would love to have a nice stable base. And yeah, that is about it for day 32. I am really glad to be reading Poliquin and some of the more exercise portion of things. I think that it's often a lot easier to digest and way less jargon heavy, so that's really cool. Yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.